Have you ever stopped to think that you might be part of one of the last moments in human history when there are still people alive who remember what life was like before smartphones, before the internet, before our existence became completely intertwined with algorithms and screens? There's a strange melancholy in realizing that at this exact moment, as you hear these words, you're witnessing the silent end of something that humanity has carried for thousands of years, the living memory of a purely analog existence, where boredom was possible, where silence didn't need to be filled, where anxiety had defined temporal limits because there was no possibility of being always connected, always available, always being bombarded by information. This isn't just a nostalgic reflection on times past, but an urgent investigation into what we're losing without even noticing, and why it matters more than we imagine. Consider for a moment your grandmother or grandfather, if they're still alive, or think about the elderly people you know. They carry in their minds something that will soon be completely extinct: the bodily, emotional, and cognitive memory of what it was like to live in a world where human attention was not a commercialized product, where relationships were not mediated by digital interfaces, where knowledge had weight and scarcity, where time passed in a fundamentally different way. When they were young, a letter took days or weeks to reach its recipient, and this delay wasn't seen as a technical problem to be solved, but simply as the temporal nature of human communication. When they wanted to know something, they had to go to a library, search through books, ask people, and often the answer simply wasn't available, and this was accepted as a normal part of the human condition. We're going through a historical transition comparable only to humanity's great revolutions, the agricultural revolution that took us from nomadic life, the industrial revolution that took us from the countryside to cities, and now the digital revolution that is taking us from physical reality to a hybrid reality where our experience is constantly filtered, optimized, and commodified by algorithms. But unlike previous transitions, which took centuries or at least decades to complete, this one is happening at the speed of 1 or 2 generations. In just 20 years, we've gone from a world where most human experience happened offline to a world where practically every significant experience has some digital component. What makes this transition particularly disturbing is that it's not being driven by fundamental human needs, but by economic and technological imperatives that operate according to their own logic, often contrary to human welfare. The attention economy has transformed our capacity for focus into a resource to be extracted, similar to how the Industrial Revolution transformed natural resources into commodities. Our minds have become territories to be colonized by corporations that have developed more sophisticated technologies to capture and maintain our attention than any propaganda or social control system that has ever existed in human history. The generation that still remembers what it was like to live before this mental colonization is literally dying. When the last person who lived their entire youth without the internet dies, something irretrievable will be lost forever. Not just information or customs, but a form of consciousness, a quality of experience that cannot be documented in books or videos because it is fundamentally experiential. It's like trying to explain to someone who has never experienced silence what true silence is like, or trying to describe to someone who has always had access to GPS what it meant to get truly lost, having to trust your own intuition and the kindness of strangers to find your way. Think about the last time you were truly bored. Not that modern boredom that is immediately interrupted by checking your phone, but deep contemplative boredom that forces the mind to wander down unprogrammed paths, that creates space for genuinely original thoughts to emerge from nothing. The previous generation knew this kind of boredom as a regular, almost daily experience. They knew what it meant to spend hours waiting in line with nothing to do but observe other people and let their minds wander. They knew what it was to have a conversation that started without a specific purpose and extended for hours, without interruptions, without the anxiety of missing something important happening online. This loss is not merely sentimental. There is growing scientific evidence that the type of cognition we develop when we are not constantly stimulated by external inputs is fundamentally different and potentially superior in many ways to the type of cognition we develop in digitally hyper-stimulated environments. The capacity for sustained attention, the ability to enter deep flow states, the capacity to tolerate ambiguity and uncertainty without immediately seeking external answers, the ability to form lasting and meaningful memories, all these cognitive capacities seem to be atrophying in populations that grew up entirely in digital environments. But what's even more concerning is that we're losing not just individual cognitive capacities, but also forms of sociability and intimacy that took thousands of years to develop. The previous generation knew how to be present with another person in a way that has become almost impossible for us. They knew how to have conversations that weren't performed for imaginary audiences, how to develop relationships that didn't leave digital traces, how to keep aspects of their lives genuinely private, not because they were hiding something, but because privacy was seen as a necessary condition for developing a rich and authentic inner life. When this generation completely disappears, we will live in a world where no one alive will be able to remember what human experience was like before it was optimized, quantified, and monetized. It will be like living in a city where all the old buildings have been demolished and replaced by modern constructions. We lose the ability to imagine what the previous architecture was like because there's no longer a physical reference to it, except that, in this case, it's not buildings being demolished, but forms of consciousness, patterns of attention, qualities of experience that once defined what it meant to be human. We can already see the first symptoms of this loss in younger generations who demonstrate levels of anxiety, depression, and difficulty concentrating unprecedented in human history. But instead of questioning whether there's a connection between these symptoms and the digital environment in which these generations grew up, the predominant response has been to develop more technology to solve the problems created by technology. Meditation apps to combat anxiety caused by other apps. Digital productivity tools to help with lack of focus caused by other digital tools. Online mental health platforms to treat depression caused, in part, by social isolation, facilitated by other online platforms. This is a particularly modern form of insanity, using the same tools that created a problem to try to solve the problem, instead of questioning whether the tools themselves might be the problem. It's like trying to cure food poisoning by eating more of the same food that caused the poisoning, but in smaller portions and at more regulated times. The logic seems sensible on the surface, but completely ignores the possibility that the real solution is to stop consuming the toxic substance. The tragedy is that many of the people making decisions about how technology should be developed and implemented have no personal memory of what life was like before these technologies. They genuinely cannot imagine that there are ways to organize society and human experience that don't depend on constant digital optimization. For them, the idea of living without smartphones or internet is not an option to be considered, but a primitive impossibility, like suggesting we return to living in caves. But the generation that still remembers offers a crucial perspective. They know it's possible to be happy, productive, and connected with other human beings without depending on technologies that monetize our attention. They lived that reality. They know that deep and lasting relationships can be formed without dating apps. They know it's possible to learn new and interesting things without algorithms personalizing our educational experience. They know it's possible to be entertained without streaming platforms fed by behavioral data. They know it's possible to work efficiently without tools that monitor every click and every eye movement. This is not an argument for returning to an idealized past, but a call for us to recognize what we're losing before it's too late. There are aspects of modern life that are genuinely superior to the past. We have access to information and educational opportunities that previous generations couldn't even dream of. We have global communication capabilities that can facilitate forms of collaboration and mutual understanding without precedent. We have tools that can help solve complex problems and improve the quality of life for billions of people. The problem is not technology itself, but our inability to use these tools consciously and intentionally. Instead of allowing technology to shape our lives according to its own logic, we need to develop the wisdom to decide when and how to use these tools in ways that genuinely serve our deepest interests and values. And this wisdom can only come from a clear understanding of what life was like before these technologies, what options exist beyond them, and what types of human experience we're willing to sacrifice in the name of efficiency and connectivity. The urgency of this issue cannot be underestimated. Each year that passes, we lose more people who carried this alternative memory of human experience. With each generation born entirely immersed in digital environments, it becomes harder to imagine that there are other ways to organize consciousness and society. Soon, we will reach a point where humanity will have completely forgotten what it was like to live in a purely analog way, and at that moment, certain options will become literally unthinkable. It's fascinating and terrifying to realize that we're living through a transformation so fundamental to the human condition that future generations might look back and see our era as the moment when humanity split into two species, analog Homo sapiens and digital Homo sapiens. And the transition between these two species is happening not through slow biological evolution, but through behavioral and cognitive changes that can be implemented in a matter of years or even months. I want to pause for a moment to ask you directly, when was the last time you spent an entire day without checking any digital device? When was the last time you had a deep conversation with someone without either of you consulting a phone during the conversation? When was the last time you allowed yourself to get truly lost without GPS and had to figure out the way using only your own navigation skills and the help of other people? If these experiences seem strange or unnecessarily difficult, perhaps that's a sign of how deeply we've already been transformed by technologies we didn't always consciously choose to adopt. And if you recognize this sense of loss, if you feel that something important has been sacrificed in the name of convenience and connectivity, share in the comments, I feel we lost some essence of human life when we stopped. Your reflection can help other people name something that many of us feel but rarely discuss openly. The implications of this transition go far beyond individual personal experiences. We're witnessing the end of forms of knowledge that cannot be digitized because they depend on bodily experience, intuition developed over decades, and types of wisdom that can only be transmitted through prolonged coexistence between generations. The farmer who knows when to plant by observing subtle signs in animal behavior and almost imperceptible changes in the quality of light, the craftsman who has developed tactile sensitivity sufficient to feel differences in material texture that no digital sensor can detect, the grandmother who knows if a child is really sick or just wanting attention based on decades of experience observing human behavior, this kind of embodied knowledge is being rapidly replaced by algorithms and sensors that may be more precise in many cases, but that operate according to a completely different logic. An algorithm can be programmed to recognize patterns, but cannot develop intuition. An artificial intelligence can process large amounts of data about human behavior, but cannot develop genuine empathy based on lived experience. A sensor can measure temperature and humidity accurately, but cannot feel the quality of air the way someone who spent decades working outdoors can feel. When the last generation that developed these kinds of non-digitized sensitivities disappears, we will lose not just specific knowledge, but entire ways of relating to the world that took thousands of years to develop. And it's not clear if it will be possible to recover these capacities once they're lost, because they depend on types of experience and practice that have become increasingly rare in digitally mediated environments. What makes this situation particularly ironic is that at the same time we're losing these traditional forms of knowledge, we're developing incredibly sophisticated technologies to preserve information. We can digitize entire libraries, create video archives of practically any event, record conversations with perfect audio quality. But lived experience cannot be archived. The quality of attention that someone develops by spending hours observing clouds cannot be transferred through time-lapse videos of cloud formations. The patience that someone develops waiting for a plant to grow cannot be simulated through digital gardening games. This is one of the great illusions of our era. The belief that we can preserve everything that matters through digital documentation. But there are aspects of human experience that simply cannot be translated into digital formats because they fundamentally depend on temporalities, rhythms, and qualities of attention that are incompatible with digital logic. And when we lose access to these experiences, we also lose parts of ourselves that we didn't know were important until they no longer exist. Imagine trying to explain to someone who has never experienced true rural silence what it means to be in a place where the only sounds are natural: wind in trees, flowing water, occasionally a bird or wild animal. Not just the absence of urban noise, but the presence of a specific quality of silence that has density, texture, that produces a specific type of mental calm that cannot be replicated through white noise apps or digitally reproduced nature sounds. This kind of silence is becoming increasingly rare, not just because there are fewer and fewer genuinely quiet places, but because we've developed an anxiety about silence that makes us automatically feel any pause with digital stimulation. The generation that remembers what it was like to live with this kind of regular silence carries something that cannot be taught, only lived. And when they die, they will take with them not just memories, but a way of being in the world that may not be recoverable through artificial recreation. It's possible that future generations will develop healthy relationships with silence and boredom, but they will probably be different forms of relationship adapted to a world that has been permanently transformed by the presence of digital technology. The same goes for many other aspects of human experience that we're losing without fully recognizing their importance. The ability to concentrate on a single task for hours without interruption, the ability to develop deep relationships without constantly documenting moments of intimacy through photos and posts, the experience of traveling to a place without knowing exactly what to expect, without having researched online reviews, without having seen hundreds of photos of the destination before arriving there, the experience of learning something new through trial and error without access to online tutorials that explain exactly how to do each step. Each of these experiences produces specific types of personal growth, skill development, and character formation that may not be replicable through digitally mediated experiences. When we lose access to these experiences, we don't lose just specific activities, but fundamental human capacities that develop through practicing these activities over time. The question we need to ask is, what kind of human beings are we becoming when we systematically eliminate experiences that were central to human formation for thousands of years? And do the capacities we're developing through digital technologies adequately compensate for the capacities we're losing? These are not questions that can be answered through quantitative research or productivity analyses, because they involve aspects of human experience that are fundamentally qualitative and subjective. What we do know is that there are concerning indicators that something important is being lost. Growing rates of anxiety and depression, especially among young people, growing difficulties with concentration and sustained attention. Relationships that become increasingly superficial and mediated by digital platforms, a generalized sense that despite all our connectivity and access to information, something essential is missing from our lives. The generation that still remembers offers a crucial perspective on these issues because they lived in both worlds. They can directly compare what the quality of life was like before and after the digital revolution, and many of them, despite appreciating certain conveniences of modern life, express a sense of loss that goes beyond simple nostalgia. They feel that something fundamental about human experience has been altered in ways that are not always beneficial. Of course, not everything about the past was better. Life before digital technology also included isolation, unproductive boredom, communication difficulties that caused real suffering, limited access to information that could help solve important problems. The question is not to idealize the past, but to recognize that in our rush to embrace the advantages of digital technology, we may have sacrificed valuable aspects of human experience without adequate consideration of whether these sacrifices were necessary or desirable. It's possible to imagine ways of using digital technology that preserve and even amplify the most valuable aspects of analog human experience. We can develop technologies that facilitate silence and contemplation instead of constantly interrupting them. We can create digital tools that strengthen face-to-face relationships instead of replacing them. We can design online environments that encourage deep thinking and careful reflection instead of impulsive reactions and superficial content consumption. But to develop these alternatives, we first need a clear understanding of what we're trying to preserve or recover. And this understanding can only come from people who actually lived alternative forms of human experience. That's why the imminent loss of the generation that remembers what life was like before the digital revolution represents not just the end of an era, but the closing of a window of opportunity to learn from ways of life that may contain essential wisdom for navigating our future. The urgency here is not just sentimental, but practical. If we want to have real choices about how technology shapes our lives, we need access to alternative models of how to live, and these models are disappearing as the last people who lived them leave this world. In a few decades, it may be too late to recover certain forms of knowledge and experience that took millennia to develop. This realization should motivate us not to reject technology, but to become much more conscious and intentional about how we use it. Every choice we make about what technologies to adopt, how to organize our digital environments, what types of experience we prioritize in our lives, contributes to determining what kind of future we're creating for humanity. And these choices become increasingly irreversible as we lose access to alternatives. If these reflections have touched on something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you're not alone. There is a growing community of people who recognize that our relationship with digital technology needs to be rethought, and that there are valuable aspects of human experience that deserve to be preserved and cultivated even in an increasingly digitized world. By joining these conversations, you will be part of a collective effort to ensure that future generations have access not just to the advantages of digital technology, but also to the wisdom and forms of experience that have defined humanity for thousands of years. This is not a journey we can take alone, but together we can create paths to a future that honors both our technological capacities and our essential humanity. The final question that remains is, what kind of legacy do we want to leave for the generations that will come after us? A world where all human experience is optimized and mediated by algorithms, where the very idea of living analogically becomes literally unthinkable, or a world where technology genuinely serves the deepest human interests, preserving and amplifying the most valuable aspects of our humanity? The choice is still ours, but the time to make this choice is running out rapidly.
Hello, everybody. And what I want to talk to you today about is the power to shape the world and the power to shape our future. About your power as leaders and as innovators, but also about the power of the human species as a whole. And the big question we are facing is whether AI is taking away humanity's power to control our future, or perhaps AI is giving humanity more power than ever before. And also, can we even speak about humanity, about a single humanity anymore? Or perhaps humanity in the era of AI is splitting into different groups, each with a radically different future. But before we get to AI, we have to say a few words about politics. The relatively stable liberal order of the early 21st century is collapsing. Instead of a cooperative order based on universal values, global institutions, and international laws, we are entering into a super competitive, chaotic world in which only one thing matters, and this one thing is brute force. Leaders like President Trump envision the world as a collection of fortresses, with each country separated from the others by high walls. Financial walls, like tariffs, military walls, cultural walls, and physical walls. This vision may have certain advantages, but it fails to address one key problem. Walled fortresses are seldom friendly. Thousands of years of history teach us that each national fortress would probably want a bit more security, prosperity, and territory for itself at the expense of the neighbors. And in the absence of universal values, global institutions, and international laws, how would rival fortresses resolve their disputes? For millennia, the vision of the world as a collection of fortresses always led to exactly the same outcome: a never-ending cycle of wars, with powerful empires conquering their weaker neighbors and eventually fighting each other for supremacy. This is already beginning to happen all around us. Wars of conquest, which were taboo since 1945, are coming back. Russia already sustained 1 million casualties in its attempt to conquer Ukraine and re-establish the Russian Empire. The Trump administration has already expressed imperial ambitions regarding Greenland, Panama, and even Canada, and seems to support Israel's conquest of Gaza. China, too, has its eyes on overseas expansion. The collapse of the old order is frightening, but it is also, of course, an opportunity to shape a better order. And the big question is, who will be the shapers? In the old liberal order, the ideal was that all humans would be shapers. It didn't matter whether you came from the USA or Brazil, whether you're white or black, a man or a woman, straight or gay, you had equal human dignity, and therefore, in theory at least, your views and interests counted for something. Sure, this liberal ideal was never fully realized. Ideals are not reality. But the liberal world was nevertheless a huge improvement over previous historical models. In the new post-liberal chaotic world, the ideal of equal human dignity is completely and openly abandoned. Instead of all humans trying to cooperate to shape a world that will be good for all humans, the current mantras are me first and might is right. A few powerful people in a handful of countries think that they have the right to shape the world for everyone. If you remember the meeting earlier this year between President Trump and President Zelensky at the White House, whenever Zelensky talked about things like justice or peace or territorial sovereignty of nations, President Trump interrupted him and said, "You don't have the cards. You don't have the cards." As we are meeting here in Sao Paulo to talk about the future of humanity, there are two questions for each of you to ponder. First, do you have any cards? Are there any cards in Sao Paulo? Or are all the cards in Washington, Beijing, and Moscow in the hands of people like Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin? The second question is perhaps even more important. Do you want to live in a world where the only thing that matters is cards? Is life ultimately just a card game with winners and losers? Now, I could have given the exact same speech that I gave now in 1939 or in 1914 or in countless other historical moments when humanity was on the brink of a major crisis. But this time, it's really different. Because as we ask ourselves, who will shape the new world of the 21st century, we need to take into account not only human shapers. For the first time in history, there are also non-human shapers on the planet, AIs. We might be quite close, maybe a few years, quite close to the moment when an algorithm would tell all humans, including Trump and Putin, you don't have the cards. As we enter the era of AI, I want to briefly explore here three questions. What is AI? What is the threat of AI? And how can all of you, business leaders, entrepreneurs, and innovators, help humanity not just survive, but also flourish in the era of AI? So let's start. What is AI? There is so much hype around this term, AI, that the term is now inaccurately applied to almost every machine, and it is becoming difficult to know what it really means. So let me be very, very clear. AI does not mean automation. AI means agency. AI is not a tool in our hands. AI is an independent agent capable of acting and learning and changing on its own. To be an AI, it is not enough for a machine to act independently. automatically. It must also have the capacity to learn and change by itself, to make decisions by itself, and to invent new ideas by itself. As a simple example, consider a coffee machine. If you press a button and the machine automatically makes you an espresso according to a pre-programmed procedure, this is not AI. The machine doesn't learn or create anything new by itself. But suppose that as you approach the machine, even before you press any button, the machine says to you, I've been monitoring you for the last few weeks. Based on everything I've learned about you, and based on your facial expression right now, I predict that you would like to have a double espresso with 1 spoon of sugar. So I've already made you such a cup. Here, take it. That's an AI. It learned something by itself and decided something by itself. And it is really AI if the following day the machine announces, I've now invented a new drink that I call Bespresso, and I think you would like it even better than espresso. So here, try it out. I made you a cup. The confusion about AI results in part from the term itself. The term AI has been invented decades ago as an acronym for artificial intelligence. But it is inaccurate to think about AI as an artificial intelligence if by artificial we mean something that is entirely designed and controlled by humans. AI is not artificial in this sense. So it's better perhaps to think about AI as an acronym for alien intelligence. Alien not in the sense that it's coming from outer space, it doesn't. Alien in the sense that this is a non-human intelligence, it's not even an organic intelligence. It operates on completely different inorganic lines. It therefore is able to make decisions and to invent ideas that would never occur to human beings or to any other organic animal. A famous example of this was given already back in 2016 when the AI AlphaGo defeated the human Go champion Lee Sedol in Seoul. This game became justly famous, not just because AlphaGo defeated the human champion. It was the way AlphaGo defeated Lee Sedol which shocked the world. Because AlphaGo, in order to win, invented new strategies for how to play the game that never occurred to any human player in thousands of years of the history of Go. Now, as long as AI invents new ways to play games or new kinds of coffee, it doesn't seem very important. But very soon, AI will invent new military strategies, new kinds of money, and even entire ideologies and religions. Consider money and finance more generally. If you recall the 2007-2008 financial crisis, you might remember that it was largely caused or started by something called CDOs, collateralized debt obligations. CDOs were financial devices invented by a handful of mathematicians and investment wizards. These financial devices were so complex that they were almost unintelligible to most humans, including politicians and regulators. And this led to an oversight failure and a global catastrophe. Now, what happens if we now allow or even encourage AIs to invent new financial devices that will be orders of magnitude more complex than CDOs and that will be utterly unintelligible to any human being. Such devices could greatly improve financial efficiency and contribute to economic growth, and they could become the bedrock of the global financial system. But what would happen to human politics when no voter or politician is able to understand and regulate finance anymore? And what happens if after a few years of unprecedented boom, the financial system suddenly busts and there isn't a single human being on earth that is able to make sense of what is happening? Now consider the implications for something like religion. Especially, let's take as an example, religions based on texts like Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. For thousands of years, Judaism granted ultimate authority not to human beings, but to texts like the Bible and the Talmud. Flesh and blood rabbis nevertheless had immense power within Jewish society for the simple reason that their holy texts could never speak for themselves. They were mute. Whenever you had a question about the text, you needed a human interpreter. Rabbis are humans who know their way around many Jewish texts, from the Bible to the latest commentaries on the Talmud. This is the source of their authority. Now, over the centuries, so many Jewish texts have been composed that not even the most learned rabbi is able to read all these texts in his or her lifetime, let alone remember everything written there. But of course, this is something that an AI can easily accomplish. AI could quickly read all the Jewish texts ever composed, remember every word in every single one of these texts, and also find patterns in the texts that have so far escaped human notice, human attention, and AI could therefore use its unprecedented scriptural understanding and knowledge to produce completely new interpretations of the Holy Word. And this, of course, is true of Christianity and Islam as well. In effect, AI can start functioning as a holy text that talks back to the faithful without any need of a human mediation. What happens to a religion of texts when the texts start talking? Now, since Judaism invests, as I said, authority in the texts, a flesh and blood rabbi cannot just ignore the scriptural arguments of an AI. And human rabbis will very soon find it very difficult to compete with AI's mastery of the Jewish canon. Even if AI is not granted formal rabbinical status, it is likely that at least some humans, including even some rabbis, would turn to an AI rabbi for scriptural guidance and inspiration. The result might be surprising new developments in very old religions or the emergence of entirely new religions. Now, these kinds of developments have enormous positive potential. They can help humanity in countless ways, from inventing new medicines to preventing catastrophic climate change. But, of course, AI also poses many threats. So let's move on to the second question of what is the threat of AI. The basic problem with AI is not that it is evil. The problem is that it is alien and therefore unpredictable and untrustworthy. At the heart of the AI race, there is a paradox of trust. Humans find it difficult to trust one another, especially as the world is becoming a collection of hostile fortresses. But the people who develop AI somehow manage to believe that we could trust the AIs. When I meet the people who lead the AI revolution, I normally ask them two questions. First, I ask them, why are you moving so fast when there are such huge risks? And the response almost everybody gives is the same. They say, we agree. We know that there are big dangers, and it would be best to proceed with more care. However, if we slow down while our competitors in the other company or in the other countries won't slow down, they will win the AI race, and the world will be dominated by the most ruthless people. We cannot trust our human competitors, so we must move as fast as possible. Then I ask the second question. Do you think you could trust the super intelligent AIs that you're developing? And the same people who just told me they can't trust their human competitors suddenly assure me that they could trust the super intelligent AIs. And this is such a paradox, because we have thousands of years of experience with human beings. We have a broad understanding of human psychology and biology, of the human craving for power, of the tricks humans use to gain power, and also of the forces that keep the human pursuit of power in check. We have also made considerable progress in finding ways to build trust between humans. 100,000 years ago, people lived in tiny bands of just a few dozen individuals and couldn't trust anybody outside their band. Today, there are nations like Brazil with hundreds of millions of citizens, and there are even bigger networks of cooperation linking all 8 billion humans on the planet. Complete strangers often grow the food we eat and invent and develop the medicines that keep us healthy. Of course, we are far from completely solving the problem of human trust, and there are still many tensions and conflicts and wars in the world. But with humans, at least we understand the challenge we are facing. In contrast, we have almost no experience with super intelligent AIs. We have just created the very first prototypes. We already know that even primitive AIs can lie, manipulate, and adopt goals and strategies that were not foreseen by their human developers. We have no idea what will happen when millions of super intelligent AIs interact with millions of humans, and it is even more difficult to predict what will happen when millions of super intelligent AIs interact with one another, creating AI societies, AI tribes. What kind of goals will they develop? What kind of tricks might they invent? True, at present, it is humans who develop the AIs, so we can try to design them in a way that will make them safe for humanity. But remember that a machine is an AI only if it is capable of learning and changing by itself, making decisions by itself, and inventing new ideas by itself. So no matter how human designs them originally, the AIs can then change in a radical and unpredictable manner. And it's a huge gamble to simply trust that these super intelligent alien intelligences will always remain our obedient servants. The humans who despair of trusting other humans, yet think they can trust these alien intelligences, may be making a very, very big mistake. Now, I know that it's sometimes hard for people to understand how AIs might escape human control. Due to the influence of science fiction, when we talk about AIs escaping our control, people tend to imagine a scenario of killer robots running in the streets, shooting people. While something like this is actually already happening in some places like Ukraine and like Gaza, this is nevertheless the wrong image. If you want to understand how AIs can escape our control, don't think about killer robots. Think about business corporations. What are corporations? Corporations like Microsoft or SpaceX or Petrobras are non-human agents. Though they don't have a body or a mind, these corporations can open bank accounts, can hire people, fire people, lobby politicians, and do many, many other things. Now, previously, this corporate agency was just a legal fiction, a fantasy of lawyers. Why? Because in practice, every decision made by Microsoft or Petrobras was actually made by some human being, not by the corporation. Every decision was made by some human executive, human shareholder, human engineer. But with AI, corporate decisions will increasingly be made by a non-human intelligence, a non-human agent. Imagine a corporation that has no human executives and no human shareholders, only AI executives and shareholders. This corporation can make billions and reshape the world. A practical question already today in 2025 is, do we want as a society to allow such things? This is a practical question. Do we as a society allow AIs to open bank accounts, to manage corporations, to trade and invest, to hire people, to lobby politicians? So let us move to the last question. How can humanity flourish in the era of AI? To survive and flourish, we need to remember two lessons from history. First, power isn't happiness. We humans have been extremely good in acquiring power, but so far we have not been very successful in translating power into happiness. That's why today we are thousands of times more powerful than in the Stone Age, but humans are not thousands of times more happy. That's also why the most powerful people in the world, like Trump and Musk and Xi and Putin, are definitely not the happiest people in the world. Secondly, to survive and flourish, we should remember also that intelligence isn't wisdom. Humans are the most intelligent animals on the planet, and at the same time, we are also the most deluded animals on the planet. No other animal can believe the kind of nonsense that humans can believe. For example, my home region of the Middle East is burning in a horrendous war, fueled in part by the most ridiculous fantasies you can imagine. Humans there, on all sides of the conflict, seriously believe that the creator of the universe commanded them to fight and kill other humans. And they also seriously believe that the creator of the universe will reward them for their violence with everlasting joy and bliss in heaven. No chimpanzee will ever believe such nonsense. But many highly intelligent humans believe it. So power isn't happiness, and intelligence isn't wisdom. AI will be more powerful and more intelligent than us. But the power of AI doesn't mean it will bring happiness, and the intelligence of AI doesn't mean that AI will be free from delusions. In fact, a super intelligence might very well be super deluded. Therefore, the big challenge for business leaders and innovators is not how to create more powerful and more intelligent technology. Rather, the challenge is how to develop the wisdom necessary to use all this power and intelligence for good purposes. How to do it? The answer is quite simple. Build more trust between humans before developing super intelligent AIs. Do you know why planet Earth is nevertheless ruled by humans and not by chimpanzees? Not because we are more intelligent than the chimpanzees. Humans rule the world because we know better than any other animal how to build trust with strangers and cooperate in very, very large numbers. We have developed this ability for thousands of years. Unfortunately, just when we need human trust more than ever before, many of our most powerful leaders are busy destroying this trust. Instead of strengthening connections between all humans, they are busy building walls between humans. If humanity is divided, AI will escape our control and will enslave or even annihilate us. On the other hand, if humanity cooperates, we can together develop AI and other technologies in a safe and responsible way. Think about AI as humanity's common child. When we educate children, we know that children learn from what we do, not from what we say. If you tell your child, don't lie, and then the child observes you lying, the child will also lie. Similarly, if you're a tech tycoon developing a super intelligent AI, and you're telling the AI, don't lie, and the AI then observes you lying, the AI will also lie. And if you tell the AI, be compassionate to people, but the AI observes you engaged in a ruthless pursuit of power, the AI will also grow up to pursue power ruthlessly without any compassion. This is why we must first solve the problem of human trust and only then develop super intelligent AI. If AI is developed in a cooperative way by compassionate and trustworthy humans, then the AI too is much more likely to grow up to be cooperative, compassionate, and trustworthy. And all of you have a role to play in that. You are leaders and innovators. Amidst the growing political chaos in the world, the business leaders and the tech innovators still have very considerable power to shape the world. So use your power to build trust between humans. Use your power to build a world which isn't just a card game between ruthless warlords. Build a world in which the dignity of everybody still counts. Thank you.
Would you regard yourself as an optimist or a pessimist with how much history you consume and with how you look at the development of the world?
I would be a realist. I'll tell you the main question. The really kind of most fundamental question. When you talk to the people who lead the AI revolution about the potential dangers, they agree. There are threats. It's just a matter of pace. Just slow down. Everybody tells you the same thing. We would like to slow down, but we can't because we cannot trust our competitors. But then you ask them, but when you develop the AI, are you sure you will be able to trust the AI? And then they tell you yes. So it's this paradox that we cannot trust the humans, but we think we can trust the machines more than we trust the humans. They realize how kind of alarming and even ridiculous is what they are saying. That we cannot solve trust between humans, but we think we can solve trust with the aliens. But the key thing is they tell you, it's like you are trapped in a room And one door, you open it for thousands of years, and there is a monster behind the door. This is the inability to trust humans. And there is another door, and there is a very high chance there is an even worse monster behind that door, but we never opened it. So we are not sure. So we are gambling the future of humanity on the chance, the small chance, that behind door number 2 is not a monster.
A lot of people hear AI, artificial intelligence, they think that intelligence is somehow connected to truth. So a super intelligent AI will have a kind of super access to truth. No, intelligence is not about truth. Intelligence is the ability to solve problems, to define goals and solve problems on the way to the goal. The truth is one of the things that can help you do that, but not the only one. And we have seen with human beings that human beings until today have been the most intelligent animals, entities on the planet. And at the same time, we have also been the most delusional entities on the planet. We believe nonsensical things that no chimpanzee and no dog and no horse would ever believe. And a super intelligence is very likely to be super delusional, even more deluded than we are. So we would need a very strong ethical basis, a very strong basis of values, more than even before, because the challenges are bigger.